exactly what you just...
Please, someone help me!
What is this sensation?
You already know this story. March 20th, 1996, 15-ish million Japanese citizens, children, parents, homebodies, salarymen, sit down looking for an explanation to the year's most popular anime. The boy hero just killed his friend. The evil council closes in, the beach is dark, and there's only one episode left after tonight. So why is it so weird? Everyone with a name has already outlined possible answers. Production ran out of budget, or time, or both. Director Anno didn't know how to frame the ending, didn't have an ending, didn't want an ending. Pick whatever combo of explanations most suits your taste. The aspect we can all agree on is once deadlines came around, choices had to be made. The phenomenon that was Evangelion could go out with either a bang, a whimper, something decent, something exceptional, or something else entirely. The only real question, as far as I'm concerned, is when the hammer comes down, how do you choose to break? This finale is not intended to be understood in the traditional sense. I think it's important to remember that. Episode 25 actively and deliberately destroys the show's formatting, eluding classic story structure as it focuses laser-like on the empathetic outcomes of our characters' arcs, leaving the mechanics of the world to disintegrate. We are subjected not to the subversion of a narrative, but the absence of one, forced to define the non-existent with only the tools of the previous, much like our cast grappling with themselves when all other tethers break away. Character and viewer alike are made to sail uncharted waters with old maps. Despite its voiding of format, however, Evangelion's final 2 episodes work in tandem under a surprisingly careful structure. The focus on Shinji opens each of our 4 acts, keeping the central strata of his arc set up but untouched until the very end, as episode 25 reflects and concludes the personal subplots of our supporting female trio. Even ignoring this technical plotting, from a philosophic angle, the themes reflected in our deuteragonists have to be syllogistically rebuffed as to discern the truth by the time only Shinji remains. At their most reductive, Asuka represents domination, Misato hedonism, and Rei nihilism. I find Zile's absence and Gendo's narrative facilitation fascinating, their own antinatalist philosophy posited as self-evident, with the trio's worldviews dismantled. Argumentatively, the whole finale works as an inverted persuasive essay, opening with the refutation and working back to the central thesis of self-agency. Episode 25 is the first of our 2-part conclusion. It and episode 26, notably, were not revised along with the previous quartet, no director's cut clarifying imagery or offering new insight, leaving our original ending untouched by re-release. Part of that decision was simply logistical. Gainax couldn't re-edit every single episode, but it also clearly defines the bounds of where the series diverges into the internal and external climaxes. What results is a television conclusion that remains distinct from its cinematic counterpart, not only thematically, but visually, and it uses that strength to its fullest extent. When earnestly diving into the series' conclusion, also remember the original script for this episode looked a lot more like the episode 25 that was folded into the end of Evangelion film. A high-octane action sequence taking place in NERV headquarters as Zile enacted their takeover plan. However, due to impossible deadlines and the complicating political variable that was the horrific and very real Alm gas attack, Gainax chose instead to completely revise the script mere weeks before the air date, reusing footage much like episodes 14 and 20 to achieve an introspective and reflective climax, and confirm many of the theories the show had put forth. In hindsight, this drastic creative choice not only saved the production, but enshrined Evangelion permanently in public consciousness, as the creative choices made herein stripped the story down to its barest thematic essentials as we moved into the end of the world. This episode, at its core, is about identity crises. Shinji struggles with duty, Asuka with inferiority, Rei with alienation, and Misato with sexuality. That's it. And although it appears to break from the stylistic foundation of the rest of the series, there are actually remarkably few new motifs presented here. Most of our visual information conveyed through typical framing, composition, and negative space. With that in mind, our opening 3 shots are definitional, philosophical, and expositional. The content itself, the words raison d'être, and their meaning serve to pull us out of the immersion we were expecting, mimicking similar openings like episodes 1 and 14, in which we are drawn out of the central story, priming us to delve into a metaphysical space. And that's exactly what we see. It's set up for this entire finale, the unbeknownst triggering of the Human Instrumentality Project, launching viewers and characters into a collective dreamscape akin to the core of an Evangelion. But we're not there yet. We see throughout the show the existential stress that piloting an Evangelion can incur, as Shinji and Asuka especially grapple with basing their entire identities on that responsibility. I can't say I wouldn't succumb to the pressure myself, having to navigate the intricacies of an engagement, remain mindful of your arsenal, and execute strategies to perfection at the risk of incredible loss. But if you think you could handle that role better, you can certainly prove your worth on the battlefield in MECHARASHI, today's sponsor. Blackjack's latest outing allows you to command a squad of mechas, known as STs, as you vie for resources and dominance in this epic SRPG. Every ST has a customizable core, arms, and legs, which you'll need to dial in on your units and target on your enemies, chipping away until those components are destroyed, eliminating the corresponding functions. You can select from a wide array of pilots, all with unique specialties, equip a vast arsenal of tiered weapons including polearms, knuckles, shields, and guns, and hone your paint job on each individual unit. Okay, seriously though, look at these graphics. The fidelity is exquisite. Love it. If you're not already playing MECHARASHI, now is definitely the time to jump in, because on January 15th, the Epoch of Ascension begins, where you can unlock Evangelion characters and themed STs. Revs 0, 1, and 2 are some of the strongest mechs in the game, and you can obtain them and the 3 S-grade pilots for free over the course of the event. That and up to 270 or more polls in your first week will help you catch up with other players so you can launch into the Evangelion-themed story event, the Future Encore, as soon as possible. Grab the chibi-style characters and the coolest mechs in the game, along with a host of login rewards, S-grade pilots, a hangar redesign, oh my gosh, there's actually so much going on here, and prove yourself on the battlefield while turning your Evangelion dreams into reality. An incredibly deep thank you to MECHARASHI for sponsoring this video. Now, we return to the void. Several shots from the previous episode's finale remind us of where last week left off, as if we need to remember, but also reassure us that the show doesn't intend to fully dislodge itself from reality quite yet. We are addressing these few loose strands first. Where things get really dicey in terms of narrative dissonance is when the title cards swap color palettes, the inversion accompanied by the words, "Why did you kill him?" going from expositional to interrogative statements, which implies a conscious entity asking these questions. So who's talking? I see 3 possible answers, all cheeky. Either it's Shinji's inner thoughts, the showrunners looking in on their own story, or the voice of the audience itself, Anno giving us a part to play in the series as it concludes. Some might also say it could be all of humanity coalescing around Shinji, but I have a reason that I think it's not that, and I'll get to it later. The question itself repeats 5 times, building persistence as we see the aftermath of Kaworu's death, before we move into the iconic endless void surrounding the spotlight, peeling back our characters. When Shinji finally responds to the question, the words shift to become more personal and intimate, just like the camera, which punches in and moves around his figure, the same technique we saw in episode 22 during Asuka's violation. And this makes a lot of sense when you consider an entity, either the audience or studio, is surrounding and intruding on his inner thoughts, just like Ariel. Shinji rebuts the accusations by asserting Kaoru's identity as an angel, reaffirming the societal hostile complex he outlined in episode 20. Of course, that complex was complicated by Gendo's categorization as an enemy, just as this situation is complicated when Rei appears to contend with her own inclusion within the society despite her angelic nature. She's in the society, so why isn't Kaoru? This answer isn't immediately given. Instead, the reality of the situation seeps in, slow acceptance spliced into tighter and tighter shots that Shinji has no argument against, simply begging for a release from his own thoughts as he finally starts up, and the frame fades away. The sequence mirrors Shinji's interrogation by Lilil in episode 16, in which he defended the achievement of his own happiness via self-deceit. In that regard, the issue of Kaoru becomes a stand-in for the more central issue of voluntary engagement underlying the series, and therefore the scope of this encounter broadens as we return to the beach, the place of unity. Here, the episode uses montage, Beethoven's Ninth, and more flashbacks to readdress Kaoru's death. Now that we understand his parable for overcoming self-deceit, we can properly answer the question. Misato posits the antithesis of acceptability. Now, Shinji grapples with it as some extremely distorted imagery wipes away all details, except for Shinji's image. The new stylistic choice may be a cue that our boy is slipping deeper into the confines of his mind, retreating within himself like Asuka, although it bears remarkably little similarity to any other sequence in the series, just as instrumentality and the visual technique itself is unlike anything humanity or we have ever experienced. The title cards are translated anxiety and fixation, with alternate translations of uncertainty and haunting uncertainty. The persistent inserts and noisy abyss used so frequently in the opening scene of the episode really conveys how different this installation aims to be, our episodic format losing definition along with Shinji in the cacophony he's allowed to envelop in. Then the critical question: what are you afraid of? Keep in mind, this question is posited in response to Shinji asking how he should cope with these emotions, insinuating he already knows the answer and must merely overcome his anxiety. He freely admits he is afraid of others' hatred, specifically from his father, or rather his father's hatred sowed the foundational fear that others will baselessly hate him as well, hence his people-pleasing tendencies. This reaffirmation coincides with the familiar shot of Shinji's eye when he glimpsed the Evangelion's nature in episode 2. In other words, looking beyond the shell he inhabits to see the monster within that needs conquering. The first step in finding solution is addressing the existence of the problem. We arrive at the deadwood in the fog, an illustration of Shinji's clouded thoughts, all color drained from the world as he reverts to split thinking. He calls the names of his society in the same order as when trapped in Lilil, adding the name of his mother, but even Yui's power can't save him this time. Perhaps the most telling section of this sequence occurs with Unit 1, whose black silhouette in red mirrors Gendo's in episode 20, during his categorization as an enemy. Paired with the parallel imagery of Kaoru's death, it's impossible not to see Shinji framed as his own victim, his progression stalled by his inflexible sense of identity, again reflected in Kaoru's murder. His decision to eliminate Kaoru was as much a selfish choice as a moral responsibility. He killed his only friend for his society's 30 silver approval, and now faces the dilemma of having to do so again in perpetuity. Being a Neva pilot is the sole defining feature he has adopted, and it compromises his morality in a way he fears will continue indefinitely. The title card, Why Do You Pilot the Eva?, is asking, who are you? A question worth returning to the void for. Shinji now upright and acknowledging the camera. We've moved on from denial. When he tries folding again, reverting to the argument of duty, Asuka appears to correct him, revealing his selfish motivations, which we see weighing on him like all the negative space above his head. This ridicule continues for a minute until Rei appears and accuses Asuka of doing the same thing, and congratulations, we are in an Ouroboros of despair. The episode broadens its topicality as Asuka is brought into the introspective, the opening shot, one of the most powerful in the series. Unit 2. Drifting underwater. The power cords hover like an umbilical tethering her back to an infantile state.
Oh, Shinji Winji, wanna call your mom? Maybe you can crawl back inside the womb.
Asuka, the girl who excelled in everything, the girl who walked on water, is drowning. Under the surface, the place of connection has become her pit of despair, the girl within the Eva, within the lake, regressing into herself. Sickness unto death. Her diagnostic cards affiliate separation anxiety and attachment behavior, terms from her violation in episode 22. We're brought to the elevator, and now Rei's lines about fearing a loss of identity if intentional and comparable factors are rescinded parallels Shinji's central struggle and reaffirms Soryu's personal arc as a doomed foil to Ikari's. The more telling line, however, comes from Asuka's younger self, where she exposes her own need for validation from others before her present self retaliates with the line, "I don't want to hear from a puppet like you," before we cut back to Rei. Now, whether the puppet line was directed at Asuka's younger self or Rei is now irrelevant. The show is conflating the two by sandwiching the sequence. Asuka doesn't hate Rei because they're opposites. She hates her because they're identical. And so we progress to the case of Rei Ayanami. Her 3 iterations struggle with her series-long dilemma of forlornness, now accepting she is an artificial body with an alien soul. Remade so many times, she's unable to link one fragment to another. I deeply enjoy how each iteration presents itself. Rei 3, our Rei, wears the school uniform and flashbacks to her bandaged hospital reintroduction, visually tying us back even earlier to her very first appearances in the street and on the stretcher, both her chronological earliest and latest manifestations. Rei 2 always wears the plug suit, the girl without enough identity to define herself, reliant on Gendo's guidance and formation. And Rei 1 continues the trend, portrayed as the child and the splintered spirit within the Eva, her psyche chaotic and undefined. The dialogue is almost entirely between the first and third, cyclical and sensical, both fully spirited iterations grappling with their purpose. Rei the First argues that persisting under the identity or name of Rei is fruitless, as their consciousness belongs to Lilith, an entity represented by kaleidoscopic inkblots, shifting, formless, and undefinable. Hilariously enough, though, the very presentation of this argument by the medium of the show undercuts the logic she puts forth, as each Rei pictured with a distinct image reaffirms the terminological deviations of each version. Each Rei made independent choices and formed their own identity regardless of the fractured soul they share. Rei 3 can define her own person, walk free of the previous identities trying to shackle her. Repentance and rebirth are her decision. The cut to black and sound of Rei rising from her chair, coupled with her expression of contempt, implies she is perhaps standing to resist the instrumentality project, the first of our cast to lead the charge against Gendo. The following shot appears a confirmation, Gendo leering frame left, a stand-in for his own ideas of regression, as Rei in frame right holds the action of the sequence. When she could oppose him, though, she concedes. Fulfillment means obsolescence, the granting of peace. Just as Shinji had his father's approval when he thought he didn't need it, Gendo is finally offering Rei the disintegration she's spent her whole life chasing. The incentive structure is impossible to overcome. Ultimately, she chooses to be his. Then, the world ends. What a frame to leave on before commercial break, am I right? Our second subtitle, Do You Love Me, comes from the R.D. Lang novel of the same name, wherein characters advance the plot through dialogue, much like our episode. Keep in mind, because the project commences in this second half after Gendo uses Rei, it's implied everything we've seen so far was in the characters' minds and not yet influenced by the merging of souls. The interruptions of different characters within another's mind are not objective. It is the character as perceived by the subject intruding in their thoughts. As individuality dissolves, however, Shinji's vulnerable body blurs into the world surrounding it, an explanation of his sensation expressed in the title cards as the project takes hold. We cut to Gendo correcting the title cards, however, which poses the possibility that every card we've read up to now could be subjective and incorrect. No longer omnipotent musings, but general suggestions. If Gendo is the authority above the title cards, they must exist within the universe and truly emphasize his power above all in this moment, right? Otherwise, the title cards are a stand-in for the audience or showrunners themselves, the line between us and the fiction of the show blurring alongside Shinji's body. Ritsuko and Misato are dead, their bodies eliminated in what was at the time some unknown catastrophe as we witness their last debate. Their final fight reveals the mechanics of instrumentality to substitute the inadequacy of a single human soul with the rest of them, negating the need for any further exploration of enlightenment, salvation, or God. Again, Ritsuko takes the side of regression just like Gendo as Misato tries condemning her before her hypocrisy is called out. The case of Misato is one of my favorites, not only because of the steadily building blocks representing Misato's initial childhood attempt to maintain parental relations, but because of the slowly wearing down of her photo, constantly patched with more and more tape until it resembles the note Gendo first sent to Shinji, a token of the father repaired in hindsight by the child, repaired but never truly renewed. What says recurrent self-destruction more than a torn and retaped image of yourself, right? Her low central framing within the chair is also evocative of her flashback in episode 21, where she confessed her fear of the dark. Nudity is not an indicator of vulnerability for Misato like it is with other characters, so the camera instead works to show her head-on in a hostile environment in which she is forced to open up to the audience. Here, Misato explains her sexual overtness was a conscious rebellion against the expectations of her father, an act of annihilating the parental faith to institute her own, just as Shinji has tried this whole show. Ritsuko and her childhood self, voices of hypocrisy and innocence, unfurling her own self-deceit with Kaji's romance, as the show itself begins breaking her motivation apart. The entire sequence featuring Misato is, like the rest of these episodes, a series of confirmations obscured by presentation. Looking beyond the disparate voices, the pixelated flashback of Kaji and Misato's episode 20 embrace, and the reuse of their episode 15 encounter reaffirms Misato's own Oedipal complex in using Kaji, who she conflates with her father, as a means of making peace with her family dynamic. She shies away from this revelation, despising the sequence as it works to unveil her inclinations to Shinji, finally revealing why she advanced on him in episode 23. Misato is fighting in a contradiction here, both wanting to sully herself in defiance, but not reveal said defiance. She wants to fell the tree but remain absent for the crash, a self-absorbed practice she can no longer hide. What I find most telling after this sequence is the open documentation, including her ID card, the age no longer scribbled out, a further show of all her impurities brought to light. She criticizes the men in her life for using work to escape harsh reality before admitting she does the same, using men and sex to fill the emptiness in her soul. Entirely unlike Asuka's stark drive for individuality is here highlighted by a conversation between her father and stepmother, overheard in childhood. Using the same frame as when she overheard their affair in episode 22, the image now dissolving into a sketch format and then further into blurriness conveys how foundational this instance was for her. Now, Asuka's cries for her mother to
Please don't stop being my mommy!
Take on a new meaning, as we understand not only Kyoko, but also her stepmother threatened to disassociate themselves with Asuka in any relationship. Asuka, Misato, and Shinji reach the same conclusion. Relationship is inherently risky, but independence is impossible. We are social creatures unable to escape our design. So a third option is proposed. Eliminate the risk by eliminating the exclusivity. When Shinji understands that instrumentality is taking place, he is separated from the selves on stage, a depiction of mindfulness as he interprets the project. The case studies we just witnessed are instrumented to highlight Shinji's faults to himself. That revelation is instrumented by the show to highlight the subjective rules and standards of narrative to the audience. That shift in perspective is instrumented by the showrunners to highlight our own inequities and agency to us viewers. Shinji has created and plunged himself into a subspace not only of the show's reality, but of narrative's preconceived laws. It is a place where the character alone decides the outcome of his arc, where truth must be divulged from farce, and it is painted to look like the stage of a theater. The theater is such a fascinating set piece for this final trial. It outlines the distinction between fact and fiction, but unlike a movie set, it doesn't correlate to the medium of the show itself, allowing the characters to perceive their illusions without yanking the audience from their immersion. The camera placement within the theater is also critically nuanced. When within the house, we see Shinji from every angle, close and all-encompassing, from the perspective of every other audience member. When on stage, we literally see behind the curtain the marks and lights and wings emphasizing our move into a place the viewer should not be allowed into, but now fully inhabits. More often than not, we are on stage looking at Shinji looking at us, forcefully spectated by the character we've been spectating, as he deciphers the performance that we are also playing in our lives. Fictional character and factual viewer are fellow travelers in this struggle to untangle our performance from our person. This is a subspace Shinji alone is plunged into, created entirely from the subjective truths he holds, yet he is anything but alone. Every member of the cast and 15 million children, parents, homebodies, salarymen, joining him in his most defining, most difficult, weirdest challenge of his life. This is only one possible ending. Will Shinji succeed? Better yet, will we? Wow, that was something, wasn't it? We've got one more. The series concludes this year. That is... that's insane, guys. Definitely will be a wild transition period. Obviously, I will not be vanishing into thin air afterwards. We will be going over the end of Evangelion film, as well as many other, I would like to think, wonderful topics and video ideas, but who knows? We'll find out, and we'll see when that all comes to fruition. Thank you again to MECHARASHI for sponsoring this video. It was absolutely incredible working with you, and I hope to do it again in the future. Highly recommend that you all check them out. They've got an awesome project going. And thank you, all of you, for watching this video, waiting patiently for its long delayed release, and making this series genuinely as good as it can be. We wouldn't be here without you. The train is pulling into the station, and I do not know what awaits beyond. But I do know I will be very thankful for your company along the trip. In the meantime, I've been Gyro, y'all have been amazing, and I'll see you all on the bright side. God bless.